Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The streets were unusually quiet for a late Lagos morning, the sun casting lazy shadows over the rows of scattered kiosks and bread stands along the roadside. Chuka Obi sat in the back of his luxurious black SUV, a car that barely belonged in this part of town. He had only instructed his driver to take this route because of the traffic ahead. But now, as they slowed to a crawl near a dusty sidewalk, something drew his attention. He peered through the tinted window, then slowly rolled it down for a clearer view. There she was, a young girl no older than 21, her dark skin glistening under the sun, standing barefoot behind a rickety wooden table lined with loaves of fresh bread. But what caught his attention wasn't her resilience or her quiet determination as she smiled at a customer. It was the necklace. That necklace, the silver heart-shaped locket with a barely noticeable crack down the center. He had given it to someone over 2 decades ago, and as far as he knew, it had never left her neck. Chuka's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't breathe for a moment. The girl's poise, the way she tucked her short natural hair behind her ear, even the soft lilt in her voice, it triggered something buried deep within him. He quickly told his driver to stop. "Buy me bread from her," he said, his voice lower than usual. The driver, puzzled but obedient, stepped out of the vehicle. Chuka remained seated, his eyes fixed on her as she gently wrapped a loaf in nylon and handed it to a woman with 2 toddlers clinging to her skirt. Her smile was soft, unbothered by the heat or the smell of nearby gutters. That necklace, it was too specific to be a coincidence. His hands trembled slightly, resting on his knee, the memory of Grace, the woman he gave it to, piercing his thoughts like an arrow from the past. Could this girl be her daughter? Or, no, that was impossible. Or was it? He stepped out of the car. For a billionaire known for keeping his distance from the public, the act was strange. His finely tailored navy blue suit contrasted the dusty ground he stood on. He walked slowly toward the stand as his driver stood awkwardly nearby, holding the bread. Chuka didn't speak to the girl at first. He just stared, noting how she clutched the necklace absently when she smiled. The girl noticed the man watching her and gave a courteous nod, unbothered by his presence. "Good morning, sir," she said warmly. "You want bread?" Her voice was melodic, disarming. Chuka didn't answer. His eyes had already gone back to the necklace. He was no longer standing on the road. He was standing in Succa 22 years ago, watching a beautiful girl laugh as she roasted corn beside her mother. He was watching her hold that same necklace, the same one he gave her before he left, before everything changed. And now, in front of him, was a girl who bore the echo of that love. A girl who might carry a truth he wasn't ready for. That night, Chuka couldn't sleep. The image of the girl, Amaka, he learned from his driver, haunted him. Not just because she reminded him of Grace, but because that necklace simply couldn't be duplicated. It was a custom piece, a one-time gift, engraved with a phrase only he and Grace knew. For every yesterday and every tomorrow. He had those words burned into his soul. He remembered the night he handed it to Grace. Her eyes sparkled under the village moonlight, her lips trembling as she promised to keep it close always. And now, years later, he had just seen that same necklace on a girl selling bread by the roadside. Was this fate or punishment? For the first time in years, he felt an ache he couldn't explain. He paced the length of his study in his mansion, fingers clenched behind his back, his heart heavy with questions that only one person could answer. He called his assistant first thing in the morning. "Find out everything about the girl selling bread on 8 Kinwell Street. Her name is Amaka. I want details. Family, background, anything," he said sternly. The assistant hesitated, but Chuka's tone made it clear there were no further questions. As he hung up, he walked to his private lounge, gazing at an old photo album he had tucked away long ago, one filled with snapshots of a life his mother tried to erase. Pictures of Grace were scarce, thanks to Lady Obi's relentless mission to purge his past. But he remembered her. God, he remembered every moment. Grace had been the one light in his young life, the only person who didn't care about his family name, or how much money he had. She laughed at his awkward jokes and gave him roasted corn in exchange for his watch once, not because she wanted it, but because she wanted him to stay. That memory alone shattered his chest now. What if she had a child? His child? Meanwhile, Amaka sat quietly beside her mother in their small one-room apartment. Grace coughed heavily on the mat, her voice weak but still motherly. Amaka cleaned her gently, then pulled off her necklace and wiped it with care. "You still wear that thing every day," Grace whispered. Amaka nodded, her eyes warm. "Because it's yours. You said it was from someone special." Grace's expression changed, her eyes drifting to the wall. "He gave it to me before everything fell apart," she murmured. Amaka didn't ask more. She knew her mother had stories she never shared. All she ever told Amaka was that her father left before she was born and never looked back. But tonight, Amaka wondered. Something about the way the rich man stared at her earlier. Something about how his eyes filled with emotion. She touched the necklace again. It felt heavier than before, like it was holding a truth that the world had buried, a truth waiting to break free. 23 years earlier, Nsukka buzzed quietly with the sounds of a regular evening. Chuka, barely 20 at the time, ducked through the back entrance of a worn-down compound, a place he had no business being. His button-down shirt was wrinkled from the motorbike ride, his loafers dusty, his body reeking of rebellion. He was the only son of Lady Obi, one of the most powerful women in the eastern region. His life had been mapped out for him. Yale, then Oxford, then marriage to a senator's daughter. But Chuka wasn't made for maps. He was made for mystery. And he found that mystery the day he wandered into the crowded street of a poor neighborhood and saw her, Grace. A young woman with radiant brown skin, expressive eyes, and an aura of quiet dignity as she flipped corn over hot coals by her mother's stand. Her laugh was unfiltered, her voice soothing like rainfall on a hot tin roof. From that moment, Chuka was hooked. He kept returning, always under different disguises, always pretending to be just another university student. Grace saw through it, of course. She teased him. "You wear cologne even when you buy Gary. You're not from here," she would say with a smirk. But she never judged. In fact, she listened to him, something few people did. They'd sit by the riverbank and talk about dreams. Chuka would confide in her about his pressure-filled life, about his mother's obsession with legacy. Grace would share stories of how her family was once wealthy, until her father lost his bank job and they lost everything. Now they lived in a single room, barely surviving on the profits from corn sales. But Grace never wore pity. She wore strength. And to Chuka, she was the first real person he had ever met. The day he gave her the necklace was the day he realized he didn't want to live without her. It wasn't long before people started talking. The rich boy sneaking into the compound wasn't invisible anymore. One of Lady Obi's spies followed him one day and reported everything. That night, she confronted him. "You're a disgrace," she said, voice ice cold. "You'll not throw away generations of legacy for a girl with cracked heels and a smoky kitchen." But Chuka didn't care. He shouted back for the first time, told her he loved Grace and no one else. That same week, Lady Obi started planting traps, calling Grace to the mansion under fake pretenses, trying to intimidate her, even offering her money to walk away. Grace refused. And so the war began, a quiet war of manipulation, money, and control. But for Chuka and Grace, it only drew them closer, until the day everything changed, and a lie would tear them apart for over 2 decades. The wind that blew that evening carried the scent of roasted corn, the scent of Grace's world, earthy, honest, unbothered by appearances. Chuka had arrived late, his shirt still smelling of expensive cologne and conflict. But as soon as he saw her waiting by the wooden bench near the riverbank, it was like the weight of the world melted away. Grace was wearing a simple blue gown, faded at the edges, but still elegant in its own way. Her smile lit up his heart. They didn't need words that evening. For months, they had danced around their feelings, always careful not to cross the line between deep friendship and emotional dependence. But the tension had grown too loud to ignore. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, heart-pounding. Inside was a silver necklace, a heart-shaped pendant with the words, "For every yesterday and every tomorrow," engraved inside. Grace's eyes widened as she touched it, then looked up at him. "This is too much," she whispered. "You're too much." But Chuka shook his head and placed it gently around her neck. "No," he said. "You're everything." That night, they sat close by the riverside, his hand brushing hers, their voices lowered into secrets and longing. Grace spoke of the things she never told anyone, her fears, her shame about her family's fall from grace, and how hard her mother worked to keep them afloat. She told him how her father, once a senior banker, had fallen into depression after losing his job. He drank, grew distant, and finally abandoned them when she was 13. Her mother, once used to shopping in boutiques and living in estates, had to learn how to bargain for onions in the market. "But we survived," she said proudly. "We found joy in simple things." Chuka sat silently, taking it all in. Her pain, her strength, it all made her more beautiful. For the first time in his life, he felt truly seen. Not as the heir of Lady Obi, not as a future CEO, just as a boy, flawed and searching. And when they finally kissed under the stars, it was as if the universe paused to give them that moment, a taste of something pure before the storm. They made love that night for the first and only time, in a place hidden beneath palm trees and silence. It wasn't planned. It wasn't perfect. But it was theirs. Afterward, Grace lay with her head on his chest, tracing lazy circles on his skin, whispering promises of a future they both hoped for. But even as he held her, a shadow lurked in Chuka's mind, the knowing that his mother would never allow it. He was due to travel abroad in 2 weeks for a business training he hadn't agreed to but couldn't refuse. He planned to return before the month ended and make things official. He would fight for Grace, no matter what. "I'll be back soon," he told her, kissing her forehead. "And when I return, you'll never have to sell corn again." Grace believed him. Because when Chuka looked into her eyes, he wasn't the heir to a dynasty. He was hers. Lady Obi stood at the center of their sitting room like a queen on her battlefield. The servants lined up in silence as she threw Chuka's clothes into an open suitcase. "You leave for London tomorrow," she said without turning to face him. "No delays. No nonsense." Chuka stormed in, eyes blazing. "You think you can just ship me off and solve everything?" he shouted. "I love her." Lady Obi laughed, a low, bitter laugh that didn't touch her eyes. "Love," she sneered. "You think love builds empires? You think love will keep your board of directors loyal when they hear you're running around with a street girl?" Chuka's hands trembled. "She's not a street girl. Her name is Grace." Lady Obi turned sharply. "Her name is Disgrace. And you will forget her." She pointed to the door. "Or I will." With that, she snapped her fingers, and the servants zipped the suitcase shut. Just like that, he was sentenced. His voice cracked. "You can't do this." She smiled coldly. "Oh, my darling son. I already have." The days leading to his departure were filled with venom-coated silence. Lady Obi launched a campaign of erasure. She blocked his calls, threatened Grace's mother with eviction, and sent spies to monitor Grace's every move. Behind the scenes, she made calls to her allies abroad, ensuring Chuka's training would be extended indefinitely. Meanwhile, she worked on her next move, recruitment. If she couldn't force Chuka to forget Grace, she'd seduce his mind with beauty and elegance. Adora, a former pageant queen and daughter of her closest friend, was summoned. She was stunning, tall, eloquent, with a figure that could halt traffic. Lady Obi moved her into their estate under the guise of a business internship. Adora was charming, flirty, and trained to be subtle. She would accidentally bump into Chuka, cook his favorite meals, drop hints of loneliness. But Chuka barely looked at her. Every time she laughed, he compared it to Grace's laughter, and it came up empty. "You're wasting your time," he told his mother bluntly. "I don't want her." Lady Obi didn't respond, but her silence was full of fury. Then came the final blow. 1 week before Chuka was meant to return home, Grace received a video. The background was his room. The voice was his. The words? Cold. "Grace, I made a mistake. I don't want this. Please stop contacting me. I've moved on. Grace sat frozen in front of the screen, her hand clutching her stomach. She hadn't even told him about the baby yet. Her mother rushed in, crying. We have to go. We have to get away from these people. They'll destroy you. Grace didn't speak. The video had broken her. She thought Chuka loved her. She believed him when he said he'd return. But now, all she had was a necklace, a lie, and a baby he didn't want. She didn't know that Lady Obi had used AI technology to fabricate the entire message. She didn't know Chuka had no idea what was happening. All she knew was that the love of her life had turned into a ghost, and she had to start over, alone. Adora had not failed before. Her beauty had broken politicians, her voice had melted CEOs, and her charm had gotten her into rooms that women twice her age only dreamed of. But Chuka Obi was different. She had been briefed. Make him feel needed, admired, adored. Let him think you're someone who understands his burdens. But Chuka wouldn't even look her in the eye. He stayed locked in his study, brooding, barely eating, his once sharp humor dulled by something no one around him understood. Adora tried everything: surprise dinners, emotional conversations, even pretending to be interested in art. But nothing worked. It was as if his heart had been packed in a box and shipped away, just like him. Lady Obi grew impatient. Try harder, she snapped during one of their private meetings. You think you're the only beautiful girl in this country? If I wanted beauty alone, I'd hire models from Cape Town. Adora lowered her eyes. He's not ready, Ma. He's broken. And broken he was. Chuka had stopped responding to messages entirely. He didn't trust anyone anymore. Every time he picked up his phone to call Grace, something held him back. What if she really had moved on? What if that video had been real? Deep down, he felt something wasn't right. But his pride, wounded and tired, kept him paralyzed. He threw himself into work, building the foundations of the empire he now ruled. But money never filled the void. He had everything: jets, estates, international deals. But he didn't have peace. And he didn't have her. He dated casually, accepted invitations reluctantly. But no one came close to Grace. He kept the necklace design in a locked drawer, touching it every time he needed to remember what real felt like. And that happened often, more often than he dared to admit. Back home, Lady Obi continued her mission. She paid off Grace's landlord to evict her. She spread rumors about her past. She ensured no medical file ever linked Chuka's name to the child Grace carried. And when Grace attempted to reach him one last time, she was stopped by two men in suits. If you come near him again, you'll be arrested, they warned. Grace collapsed in tears that night, hugging her belly. Her mother wiped her eyes and said, "Forget him, my child. We have to survive now." So they moved far from Nsukka to a new city, where no one knew them, and started over. Grace sold snacks and cleaned offices. Her daughter, Amaka, was born on a rainy night in a clinic with flickering lights. Grace held her close, looked into her eyes, and whispered, "You are not a mistake. You are my miracle." And on her neck, she still wore the necklace, the only piece of the past that couldn't be erased. The days after Chuka's departure were like walking through a nightmare Grace couldn't wake up from. The silence, once filled with expectation, now echoed with betrayal. Her mother watched helplessly as Grace slowly withered, not physically, but emotionally. She moved around the house like a shadow, clutching the necklace he gave her like a lifeline. Grace still refused to believe it at first. She played the AI-generated video repeatedly, hoping to find a hint of hesitation in his voice, a flicker of truth that told her it was fake. But every time she watched it, her heart shattered all over again. "I made a mistake. I don't want this. Please stop contacting me. I've moved on." The voice was his. The face was his. But the soul behind it was missing. Grace tried to write letters, to call, but nothing went through. His phone line was blocked. His email bounced back. She even went to his home, only to be turned away at the gate like a beggar. What had she done to deserve this? Weeks turned into months, and the first signs of her pregnancy became impossible to ignore. Her mother noticed it first, the nausea, the mood swings, the strange cravings. Grace confessed one evening, tears running down her face, her head buried in her mother's lap. "Mama, I'm pregnant." Her mother didn't scream or scold. She simply sighed and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "Then we will raise this child together," she whispered. But Lady Obi was not finished. She returned, this time with 2 men in suits and a legal document. She offered Grace a large sum of money to terminate the pregnancy and sign a non-disclosure agreement. "My son will never be tied to a child from the gutter," she said coldly. Grace's mother rose with fury, tearing the envelope and throwing it back in their faces. "He gave her a child. He gave her a future. You cannot erase that." But Lady Obi was unmoved. "Try me." The threats that followed were clear. Grace would face false arrest, defamation, and even exile if she didn't disappear. Grace made the hardest decision of her life. She took what little money they had and fled with her mother in the middle of the night. They boarded a crowded bus to another city where no one knew their story. No one cared that she once loved a man named Chuka Obi. Grace started from scratch, cleaning classrooms in a secondary school during the day and making snacks at night. She refused to let the shame define her. And when her daughter was born, a dark-skinned baby girl with big, expressive eyes and strong lungs, she named her Amaka. "God is beautiful," she said, holding the newborn against her chest. Grace didn't cry that night. She smiled, not because she had healed, but because the child in her arms made the pain worth it. She tied the necklace around Amaka's cradle and whispered, "One day, you'll know what this means. But for now, just sleep. I'll carry the story until you're strong enough to hear it." Years passed in quiet resilience. Grace never spoke about Chuka again, not even when Amaka asked about her father. "He's a traveler," she would say with a soft smile. "One day you'll understand." She raised Amaka with pride, instilling values of hard work, honesty, and dignity. Despite their poverty, Amaka always looked neat, her uniforms ironed, her lunchbox packed with something, even if it was just Gary and groundnuts. She excelled in school, often topping her class, often too mature for her age. Grace watched her with a bittersweet ache, seeing both herself and Chuka in that girl. She told herself it didn't matter, that he never came looking. She told herself she didn't need him. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, she'd find herself staring at the necklace and wondering, did he ever think of her? Did he even know? The silence wasn't just external. It was in her bones. Grace had become a woman of few words, speaking only when necessary, smiling when forced to, and crying only when Amaka was asleep. The burden of raising a child alone, the burden of keeping the truth from her, it all weighed heavily on her heart. And then came the health issues. It started with fatigue, then nausea, then weight loss. Grace ignored it until she collapsed one afternoon while cleaning an office floor. The diagnosis was stage 2 cervical cancer. Treatable, they said, but the cost was impossible. She didn't tell Amaka. Instead, she doubled her efforts, working longer hours, borrowing money quietly, and enduring the pain silently. Amaka noticed the decline, but every time she asked, Grace would smile and say, "Just tired, my love." But inside, her body was failing, and the one man who should have known was nowhere. Back in Lagos, Chuka had grown into a titan, a billionaire with his hands in oil, construction, and telecommunications. But despite all the success, there was always a part of him that felt incomplete. He never truly loved again. He never married. His heart, once capable of pure affection, had grown guarded and silent. Every year on his birthday, he would pull out the old design of that necklace and wonder, where was she now? Did she ever think of him? He believed she had moved on, believed she had married someone better. But part of him, the part that still knew how to dream, whispered that she hadn't. That maybe, just maybe, fate would bring them back together. He didn't know how right he was. And he didn't know that the storms Grace endured all these years were leading her back to him. Not for romance, not for apology, but for revelation and redemption. The rain that day came without warning, splattering the dusty roads of Amaka's neighborhood, soaking through the ceiling of their tiny room. Grace lay curled on the mat, a thin blanket covering her frail body, her eyes sunken, skin pale. Amaka had stepped out to buy medicine when the knock came, loud, deliberate, cold. Grace opened the door slowly and stood face to face with a woman she hadn't seen in over 2 decades, Lady Obi. The years hadn't dulled her cruelty. She stood in a black designer jacket, holding a purse more expensive than the entire apartment. Still living like a rat, I see, Lady Obi hissed. Grace didn't flinch. Why are you here? She asked weakly. Lady Obi walked in uninvited, eyeing the cracked walls and peeling paint. I came to ensure you remember our deal. Grace coughed violently, holding onto the wall for support. There was no deal. You threatened me and chased me away. Lady Obi narrowed her eyes. Semantics. She pulled out an envelope and threw it on the ground. Here, take it. It's more than enough to disappear again. This time forever. Grace didn't bend to pick it. He deserves to know, she said. She deserves to know. Lady Obi laughed. She deserves a life without scandal. Do you want her to be mocked? Labeled a bastard child? I know people. I control things. If you speak to my son, I will ruin you both. Grace's lips trembled. He loved me. You lied to him. Lady Obi's voice dropped low. And you think he'll believe you now? After 20 years? He has moved on. You're nothing but a sick woman clinging to a necklace and an illusion. Grace collapsed into a chair, weak from rage and pain. Lady Obi leaned close, her perfume overwhelming. Let the past die, or I will kill it myself. With that, she turned and left. The room seemed colder when she was gone, the walls pressing in tighter. Amaka returned shortly after and found her mother shaking, the envelope unopened on the floor. Mama, what happened? She asked, kneeling beside her. Grace shook her head. Nothing, my love. Just someone from the past. She tucked the envelope under a pile of old clothes and smiled faintly. But inside, she was breaking. The visit from Lady Obi reminded her of everything she had buried, and everything she had to protect. Grace knew she was dying. She knew time was running out. But she wasn't ready to hand her daughter a broken truth. Not yet. She had one task left, to ensure that when the truth finally came, it would come on her terms. Not Lady Obi's, not the world's, but hers, for every yesterday, and every tomorrow. Amaka always rose before the sun. She had to. The bakery only gave her 2 trays of bread to sell each morning, and if she didn't arrive at the roadside early enough, the best-selling spots would be taken. She moved swiftly, balancing her tray on her head, a satchel across her shoulder, and that same necklace around her neck, the necklace her mother never allowed her to remove, even on her sickest days. She didn't understand why it mattered so much, but she respected it. It was a gift from someone who once meant the world to me, her mother would say with that faraway look in her eyes. Amaka always wondered who he was. A lover? A friend? Her father? The last question always remained unspoken. Grace never answered it, and Amaka had learned not to ask anymore. She focused on their survival instead. The small money she made selling bread, the part-time cleaning job at a local private school, and the evening tutoring she gave to children whose parents could barely afford it. She was tired, but she was proud. That morning had started like any other, until the man in the black SUV arrived again. He didn't come out this time. He sat quietly in the back seat, his tinted window halfway down. She had seen him before, tall, elegant, eyes intense. Something about the way he looked at her made her nervous. Not in a creepy way, but in a way that unsettled her spirit. He wasn't just looking at her. He was seeing her, like she reminded him of someone buried deep in memory. She adjusted the necklace, feeling the weight of it, then looked away quickly and offered soft, "Good morning, sir." He didn't respond, only nodded. His driver bought bread again, paid too much, and said nothing. Amaka took the money, puzzled. She'd met rich people before, rude, loud, showy. But this man was silent, haunted. She wondered if he was grieving. She didn't know she was the one digging up his past. That night, Grace was too weak to sit up. Her lips were dry, her breathing shallow. Amaka made her thin pap and fed her slowly. Grace tried to speak, but her voice trembled. If I don't make it, go to the box under my bed, she whispered. There are letters. Truths. You deserve to know. Amaka froze. Mama, don't talk like that, she pleaded. Grace gave a tired smile. I'm not talking like that. I'm preparing. Life has a way of catching you off guard, my child. And when it does, you'll need answers more than anything else. Amaka didn't ask further. She simply held her mother's hand until she fell asleep. But her heart was restless. Something was happening. She could feel it. And somehow, she knew that the man in the black car, the necklace, and the silence her mother carried for years were all pieces of the same story. A story she had lived her whole life without realizing she was in it. Chuka couldn't ignore it anymore. The girl had haunted his every waking thought since he saw her. The way she tucked the necklace under her blouse when she smiled. The way her eyes danced like Grace's used to when she spoke. He had always told himself that some wounds were too deep to dig up, that Grace was probably long gone or happily married to someone else. But that necklace, that one specific locket, destroyed all his excuses. He poured himself a drink that evening and stared out the large window of his mansion overlooking the city skyline. He hadn't felt this unsteady in years. With a sudden decision, he called his assistant, a loyal man named Yuzo, and said, I want you to find out who she is. Everything. Her full name, her family, where she lives, where she works. Quietly. No mistakes. Yuzo, sensing the urgency in his boss's voice, replied simply, Yes, sir. Within 48 hours, Yuzo returned with a folder. Chuka sat behind his large oak desk, his fingers trembling as he flipped through the documents. Her name was Amaka Grace Nwokoi. His breath caught. Grace. Her mother's name was Grace Nwokoi. Age 44. Medical condition, terminal cervical cancer. Occupation, cleaner and roadside vendor. Last known address, Ajagunal. No records of marriage. No trace of a father. No legal guardianship history. Chuka's eyes blurred. He shut the folder and leaned back in his chair, heart racing. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Grace hadn't moved on. She hadn't married. She hadn't erased him. She had simply disappeared. Or maybe she was made to disappear. All the doubts he'd ignored for years came flooding in. The AI video. The messages that never arrived. The way his mother always deflected questions about her. He began to tremble. What had really happened? He drove himself that night. No driver. No bodyguards. Just him and the soft echo of heartbreak slamming back into his soul. He drove through the rain, navigating the unfamiliar, narrow streets of Ajagunal until he found the building listed in the file. A small compound with cracked cement walls and rusting iron gates. He parked and stared at the front door. He couldn't go in. Not yet. He wasn't ready. Instead, he sat in his car, watching as a neighbor stepped out to dump water. Then as a child ran across the yard chasing a goat. Then the door opened. A girl stepped out holding an umbrella, barefoot, her scarf loosely tied. It was her, Amaka. He watched her help an old woman into a chair by the door, then adjust a plastic sheet to keep out the rain. She had Grace's kindness, Grace's strength, but she also had his eyes. And in that moment, Chuka knew the truth. He wasn't just looking at the daughter of the woman he once loved. He was looking at his daughter. The next morning, Chuka returned, this time dressed in modest clothes, the kind that didn't scream wealth. He waited until Amaka left with her tray of bread before stepping out of his car and walking up to the door. He knocked gently. A pause. Then the door opened slowly, and he saw her. Grace. Older. Thinner. Her face had lost its youthful softness, her eyes sunken. But it was her. She gasped, hand flying to her mouth, the necklace still glinting faintly on her chest. Chuka froze. The world tilted. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Grace whispered, You're alive. Chuka stepped forward, his voice cracking. I've been looking for you. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know about Amaka. I didn't know anything. Grace's eyes filled with tears. That's a lie. She turned and walked back inside, leaving the door open. Chuka entered slowly, overwhelmed by the familiarity of her presence. The small apartment was clean but sparsely furnished, a mat, a table, 2 plastic chairs, and a shelf stacked with old books. Grace sat weakly, coughing into her scarf. He moved toward her, kneeling beside the chair. "Please," he said, "help me understand. I need to know." Grace stared at him for a long time, then gestured toward a small wooden box by the wall. "It's all in there," she whispered. "I wrote everything over the years. I thought maybe one day Chuka opened the box and found dozens of letters, unsent, worn at the edges. Letters detailing her pregnancy, the AI video, the threats from his mother, the eviction, the fear." Tears streamed down his face as he read them, each word a dagger. "She told me you sent that video," Grace said weakly. "She offered me money. She said she'd ruin my life if I didn't disappear." Chuka buried his face in his hands. "I swear to you, I never said those words. I never sent that message. I thought you left me." Grace gave a bitter smile. "And I thought you abandoned me. So we both suffered in silence while your mother won." Chuka looked at her with pain in his eyes. "I should have fought harder." Grace touched his arm. "We were young, and your mother was powerful. But Amaka, she's everything." He nodded. "I saw her. She's perfect." Grace closed her eyes. "Don't take her from me. Don't let your world destroy her too." Chuka shook his head. "No. I just want to know her. I want to be whatever she'll let me be." Grace smiled faintly. "Then earn it. Slowly. Like the rain. Not all storms are violent." And with that a new chapter began, one filled with guilt, healing, and the fragile thread of a bond 20 years overdue. The sun that streamed into the small apartment the next morning was soft, almost reluctant, as if aware of the heaviness that lingered in the air. Chuka arrived again, this time carrying groceries and medication. Grace was lying weakly on the mat, her body frilier than it had been the previous day. She lifted her eyes and gave him a look that mixed exhaustion with resignation. "You came back," she whispered. Chuka sat beside her gently. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Then he brought out the stack of letters again, spread them before her, and asked her to go over everything in her own words. With a sigh of both pain and release, Grace began. Her voice trembled as she spoke about how she waited for him for weeks after he left, still wearing the necklace, still holding on to hope. Then came the AI video, an invention crafted with cruel precision by Lady Obi's team. The voice was his. The room looked like his. But the soul behind the message was empty. "I thought you changed," she said. "I thought I was just another poor girl you wanted to forget." Chuka shook his head, tears silently falling down his face. "I swear I never sent it. I didn't even know AI could do that back then." Grace's lips trembled. "Your mother came to me. She brought men in suits. She told me to abort the child. Told me to vanish or be arrested. I had nothing. No one." Her voice broke as she looked away. "I thought you knew. I thought you sent her." Chuka reached out and held her hand gently. "If I had known, Grace, if I had known, I would have burned the world just to find you." She chuckled sadly. "But you didn't. And I raised Amaka alone." Chuka bowed his head. "You shouldn't have had to. And now it's too late to fix any of it, isn't it?" Grace didn't respond immediately. Then she said softly, "It's never too late to tell the truth, but it is too late to erase the scars." They sat in silence for a long time. Outside, children played and laughed, oblivious to the gravity of what was unfolding inside. Chuka finally asked the question that had been haunting him since the moment he saw Amaka. "Does she know I'm her father?" Grace shook her head. "No, I never told her. She knows you gave me the necklace. She knows you meant something, but not who you are." I couldn't bear the idea of her hoping for someone who never came. Chuka nodded slowly. "Then let me tell her, please." Grace looked at him with eyes that had known too much sorrow. "Don't tell her with words. Show her. Let her see the kind of man you are now. Let her choose whether she wants to know you." Chuka swallowed the lump in his throat. "I will. I promise." And that promise, though late, was the first brick in a bridge he knew he had to build. a bridge between the past he lost and the future he hoped to gain. Amaka returned home that evening to find the apartment tidier than usual. The dishes were done. Her mother's blanket had been changed, and a warm aroma of pepper soup drifted from the kitchen corner. "Mama," she called. Grace was sitting up, her cheeks a little brighter, her eyes a bit clearer. "I had a visitor," she said simply. Amaka furrowed her brows. "That man again? The one in the black car?" Grace nodded. "His name is Chuka." Amaka stared. "Why does that name sound familiar?" Grace hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Maybe because I used to say it in my sleep." Amaka didn't laugh. Something about the way her mother said his name felt loaded. She helped her mother eat, cleaned up, and tried not to ask more. But that night, while lying in bed beside Grace, she whispered, "Is he my father?" Grace didn't respond. Her silence was answer enough. And just like that, the world Amaka thought she knew tilted slightly. Meanwhile, Chuka sat in his mansion, alone with his thoughts, plagued by a guilt so intense he could barely breathe. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, searching for the man he used to be, the boy who once gave a girl a necklace by a riverbank and promised her the world. That boy was long gone. In his place was a man who had built empires on broken bricks, who had silenced his heart for the sake of legacy. And what did legacy give him? Empty hallways, shallow connections, a daughter he didn't know. He thought about all the times he could have searched harder, questioned more, defied his mother. But he didn't. And now, the little girl he could have held, protected, watched grow, had become a woman with wounds he had never seen. A woman who looked at him with suspicion instead of recognition. He had missed her entire life. That was a kind of death on its own. Determined to begin somewhere, Chuka started leaving small gifts near their door, not expensive ones, but thoughtful ones. A pack of her favorite snacks. A pair of new shoes in her exact size. A book on African women's literature. Something she once mentioned to a neighbor. He never attached his name. Just quiet gestures, hoping to soften the distance. At work, he found himself distracted, canceling meetings, ignoring deals. His staff whispered about his change in demeanor. But Chuka didn't care. For once in his life, business could wait. He began preparing a file, everything she would need if she ever accepted him, a trust fund, access to top medical care for Grace, even plans to relocate them to a safer neighborhood. He didn't do it to impress her. He did it because it was right. He had lost so much time, but maybe, just maybe, he could still be the father she never had, if not in title, then in action. The Obi mansion stood like a fortress in the highbrow part of Ikoyi. Its tall gates and polished walls a cruel contrast to the fragile world Grace and Amaka had been surviving in. Chuka stormed through the front doors that evening, his face tight with rage. Servants stepped aside nervously as he made his way into the marble-floored lounge. Lady Obi was seated on a velvet settee, sipping herbal tea and scrolling through her tablet. She looked up casually. "You look tense," she said. Chuka didn't smile. "What did you do to Grace?" he asked, voice low but lethal. Lady Obi's smile didn't waver. "I protected you, like any good mother would." Chuka moved closer. "You sent her a fake video. You threatened her. You forced her to disappear. And because of you, I missed my daughter's entire life." The air shifted. Lady Obi's smile cracked. "You found her," she said slowly. "So what now? You'll bring her into this house? Parade her around as your heir? You'll soil our name with slum blood." Chuka's voice rose, fury erupting. "Don't you dare talk about them like that. Grace was the only real thing in my life. And Amaka, she's everything I ever wanted to be. Smart, strong, compassionate. Not like this empire of polished cruelty you've built." Lady Obi stood, her expression now hard. "I did what I had to do. That girl would have ruined you. You would have given up everything for a commoner. I was saving you from yourself." Chuka shook his head. "You weren't saving me. You were controlling me. And you leet. You broke people to protect a name." Lady Obi's voice trembled slightly. "I raised you. I built this legacy. You don't get to throw it away for some mistake you made as a boy." Chuka stepped forward, eyes blazing. "She wasn't a mistake. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. And you destroyed it. There was silence. Then Lady Obi, voice laced with venom, said, "If you choose them, you're no longer my son." Chuka didn't blink. "If choosing love, truth, and my own child means I lose you, then so be it." He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing through the cold mansion. For the first time, Lady Obi sat down, shaken. She had always believed power could shield her from consequences. But this time, the son she raised in her own image had turned away, not with hatred, but with clarity. And that, more than anything, frightened her. Outside, Chuka breathed deeply. The rain had started to fall again, but it felt different now, like cleansing. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "I'm coming for you, Amaka. Not as a billionaire, not as a stranger, but as your father, if you'll let me." The night was colder than usual, and even though the windows were shut, a strange chill crept through the little room. Grace had been growing weaker over the last few days, her voice now barely audible, her eyes dimmed by exhaustion. Amaka sat by her side with a wet cloth, dabbing her forehead gently. She had noticed something different in her mother since Chuka's visits, a strange peace mixed with urgency. Grace had been writing almost non-stop during her moments of clarity, stopping only when her hands trembled too badly to hold the pen. "What are you writing, Mama?" Amaka had asked once. Grace had smiled faintly. "The things I should have said, and the ones I never could." That evening, as rain tapped gently against the roof and candlelight flickered in the shadows, Grace called Amaka close. "I need you to promise me something," she whispered. "No matter what happens, don't let pain steal your joy. Don't let the past close your heart to love." Amaka swallowed the lump in her throat. "Mama, don't talk like this. You're getting better." But she knew it was a lie. The clinic had refused to admit Grace without full payment. Chuka had offered to help, but Grace refused to leave their home, saying she wanted her final breath to be taken somewhere familiar, not a white room with machines. Amaka had tried everything, borrowed money, begged for herbal cures, stayed up nights praying. Nothing worked. And now, the woman who had raised her with such grace and grit was slipping away. Grace took her hand and pressed a folded paper into it. "When I go, give this to him. Don't read it. It's not for you." Amaka nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You'll give it to him yourself," she said, voice shaking. But Grace only smiled, eyes soft. "No, my love. My time is almost up. But your story, it's just beginning." That night, while Amaka dozed off beside her mother, holding her hand, Grace took her final breath. It was quiet, so gentle it almost felt like sleep. Her chest stopped rising, and her lips curved into the faintest smile. When Amaka woke up an hour later and touched her, her skin was cold. A scream tore from her throat, shaking the neighbors awake. They came running, but it was too late. Grace Nwokoi, the woman who had endured loss, betrayal, and loneliness, was gone. And in her hands, still clutched tightly even in death, was the edge of her daughter's blanket, as if she was still holding on. The funeral was small and painful. Chuka arrived, standing in the back quietly, wearing plain clothes and sunglasses. He didn't speak. He didn't weep. But when the coffin was lowered into the ground, he felt at his knees and pressed his palm against the dirt. He had found her, only to lose her again. And this time, there would be no second chance. The days after the funeral passed in a blur for Amaka. She barely spoke. She barely ate. She wore her grief like a heavy cloak, trudging through each hour with a numb heart. The world moved on, as it always does, but for Amaka, everything had paused. The small apartment felt like a tomb, every corner echoing her mother's voice, her laughter, her cough. The mattress still bore the imprint of her body, and the necklace still hung around Amaka's neck, heavier than it had ever been. On the third day after the funeral, she opened the box under the bed, the one her mother told her about before she died. Inside were the letters, journal entries, and folded newspaper clippings. At the bottom was the letter addressed to Chuka Obi. She picked it up with trembling hands, debating whether to open it. But something inside her said no. Her mother had trusted her with it. She would honor that. Later that week, Chuka returned. He didn't call. He didn't send a driver. He came alone, like a man approaching a grave. Amaka opened the door slowly when he knocked. She looked different, older somehow. Not physically, but in presence. Her eyes, once filled with hope, now held a quiet strength, born from grief and too many unanswered questions. She didn't invite him in, but she didn't send him away either. "I have something for you," she said, and handed him the letter. Chuka took it reverently, as though she'd just placed a newborn child in his arms. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he sat on the bench outside the compound, while Amaka stood near the doorway, arms folded. "I loved her," he finally said. "Every day of my life, even when I didn't know how to show it." Amaka didn't respond. She stared at him for a long time. "Why didn't you come for us?" she asked quietly. Chuka looked at her with eyes full of guilt. "Because I didn't know you existed. And when I did, it was too late." He opened the letter. Grace's handwriting was faint but elegant. In it, she told him about the night they shared, the day she found out she was pregnant, the horror of the AI video, the threats, the exile. But more than that, the letter wasn't about the past. It was about the future. She asked him to care for Amaka not with money, but with presence. "She doesn't need a billionaire," the letter read. "She needs a father. And you owe her that." Tears welled in Chuka's eyes. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his jacket. Then he looked at Amaka. "I don't know how to be what you need, but I'm willing to learn, if you'll let me." Amaka didn't say yes, but she walked over and sat beside him. And for the first time since her mother died, she let herself cry, not out of grief, but out of release. And as the sun set over the dusty road, the necklace around her neck glinted, not as a symbol of sorrow anymore, but of hope. The weeks that followed were strange for Amaka. She wasn't used to people checking on her, texting to ask if she'd eaten, or stopping by just to leave mangoes or books. But Chuka did those things. He didn't try to buy her love. He didn't flaunt his wealth or offer her designer clothes. He simply showed up. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes he just sat with her in silence. And slowly, something in Amaka began to soften. She found herself laughing again, even if only once in a while. She began asking him questions about his work, his childhood, his regrets. He answered all of them honestly, never hiding behind rehearsed answers. He told her about his mother, about the mansion he hated, about the emptiness of boardrooms filled with people who didn't know him. And every time he spoke, she saw another layer of him. Not the billionaire, but the man who had once loved a girl named Grace and never stopped mourning her. One afternoon, Amaka took him to the school where she used to tutor children. The staff and students were stunned when they saw the famous Chuka Obi walking through the gates, but he downplayed everything. He sat on a broken bench, listening to the children recite poems, laughing as one little boy accidentally called him Daddy Bread. Amaka watched the way he interacted, so natural, so present, and it stirred something in her. Afterward, they walked home slowly, and she asked, "Did you ever want kids?" Chuka nodded. "I did. I just thought that door was closed for me." She looked at him for a moment. "Well, I'm here now." That evening, he gave her a small velvet box. Inside wasn't jewelry or gold. It was a folded note, one that simply read, "Let's begin again." She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just hugged him tightly. And for the first time in both their lives, they finally knew what it meant to have a family. They didn't rush things. Chuka didn't move her into his mansion. He helped renovate the apartment instead. He arranged medical bills to be settled anonymously, and he quietly put Amaka's name on a scholarship fund she didn't know existed. He wanted her to grow, not to be rescued. And Amaka, in turn, began helping him rediscover life outside money. She took him to roadside eateries, made him laugh with market women, showed him joy in ordinary things. She taught him how to be simple again. And every time he looked at her, he saw grace, not in her face alone, but in her fire. The love that once seemed lost forever was still alive, not as romance, but as legacy. And it lived in Amaka, a daughter he never knew, a daughter he would never lose again. The tension that hung over the Obi estate the day Chuka announced his decision was palpable. For years, he had quietly let his mother control the family narrative, who they associated with, what kind of women he was allowed to be seen with, what legacy he could leave behind. But all that changed the moment he stepped into the family boardroom and declared that his daughter, Amaka Grace Obi, would be publicly acknowledged and legally recognized. Gasps rippled through the room. The executives murmured among themselves, eyes darting toward Lady Obi, who sat stiffly at the head of the table. Her face remained a carefully constructed mask of calm, but her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, were cold enough to slice granite. "You must be joking," she finally said, her voice smooth but venomous. "You intend to embarrass this family with a child born out of scandal?" Chuka stood calmly, hands clasped behind him, every inch the commanding figure he had grown into. "You already embarrassed this family when you orchestrated a lie that destroyed a woman's life," he replied. "I won't continue that legacy. Amaka is not a scandal. She is my daughter, and she will carry our name whether this table approves or not." Lady Obi's hand trembled slightly, her knuckles white against the polished mahogany. "I built this empire with my bare hands. I protected you from falling into poverty, from ruining yourself for some commoner. And now you repay me by dragging a bastard into our name." Her voice rose as she stood. "I will not allow it." Chuka's voice dropped to a near whisper, but the entire room went still. "Then disown me. Cut me off. Destroy whatever image you need to, but I will not deny my daughter for your comfort." The silence was deafening. Lady Obi's mouth opened, then closed. She had never been defied like this, not by Chuka, not by the son she had molded from birth to be a reflection of her strength. But in that moment, she realized she had failed to strip him of his heart. "You're throwing away everything," she said quietly. "No," Chuka replied, "I'm reclaiming it." He turned and walked out without another word, leaving behind the boardroom, the legacy built on cold ambition, and the mother who had cost him the love of his life. Outside, the press was already gathering. Rumors of his mysterious daughter had begun to leak. But Chuka wasn't afraid. That night, during a private dinner he hosted for Amaka at a modest restaurant near Grace's old neighborhood, he told her everything. Not just about the boardroom, but about the fight. "I chose you," he said simply. "And I'll keep choosing you, even if it costs me everything." Amaka's hand reached across the table, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a girl who had lost her mother. She felt like a woman finally being seen. It was a quiet morning at Grace's gravesite, overgrown with soft weeds, but still visited. Amaka stood by the headstone, holding a small bouquet of lilies in one hand and a new necklace box in the other. Chuka stood beside her, dressed simply in jeans and a shirt, no bodyguards, no press. Just a man and his daughter, visiting the woman who had changed both their lives. Amaka knelt beside the grave and brushed the dirt gently from the engraved name. "Grace Nwokoi, beloved mother, fierce soul." "I wish you were here," she whispered, "so you could see what your love created, so you could hear him say it himself." Her voice broke, and she felt Chuka's hand on her shoulder. He knelt beside her and opened the box. Inside was a gold heart-shaped locket, identical in shape to the one he had given Grace years ago. But this one carried a new engraving, "For every tomorrow you never saw." "I had this made for her," he said softly, "but she never got to wear it. I want you to have it." Amaka looked at the necklace, then at him. "I don't want a replacement," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "I want to keep hers. The old one." Chuka smiled, eyes misty. "Then we're both. One for her memory, and one for your future." She nodded slowly and clasped the new necklace around her neck. It sat just above the old one, two hearts resting side by side, two lifetimes connected. They stood there for a while longer in silence, letting the wind carry their thoughts. In that moment, it didn't matter that their beginning had been broken, or that it had taken years to uncover the truth. What mattered was that Grace's love, once buried by lies, had been resurrected in her daughter's dignity and her father's redemption. And it would never be buried again. As they walked away from the grave, hand in hand, Chuka turned and looked back one last time. "You stole my past," he whispered under his breath, imagining his mother's face. "But you will never touch my future. Back at home, Amaka placed the new necklace beside a framed picture of Grace on the shelf. She didn't feel like a poor girl anymore. She didn't feel fatherless. She felt whole. And when she looked at her reflection in the mirror, at the two necklaces on her chest, she didn't just see jewelry. She saw strength, survival, and a story that was no longer hidden. It was the necklace of yesterday, and the legacy of every tomorrow she was now ready to live. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.